Hayling Beach in the middle of winter. It's spectacular, but very windy. When it's not blowing, it's raining, often both, and springtime still seems a long time off. When the Brent geese start to get restless and move back to their Arctic breeding grounds, we can look forward to some better weather to come. Suddenly everything seems to burst into life at once, and there's blossom everywhere. Hayling looks at its very best, and we can enjoy the fine spring weather. One day last autumn, we chanced upon what seemed like some strange pagan ritual taking place in Staunton Avenue. However, fear not, it was the lions doing their best to smother Hayling's roadsides in a riot of yellow next spring. And a few months later, we can all enjoy the results. This community spirit is reflected in many more charitable activities around the island, not least in the annual Hayling to Paris bike ride, which annually raises thousands of pounds for local charities.
The lunch stop is actually what used to be the main road.
We're in the final planning stages of the Paris to Hayling charity cycle ride. This is the 16th annual ride, which takes place in July of this year. We have 3 events, leaving on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, 2nd, 3rd and 4th of July, returning on Sunday, the 8th of July. Peter McQuaid started the ride back in 1986, and I'd like to ask him to say a few words about how it all started.
Yes, we started in 1986 when I did a solo ride for cot death research. Following on that ride, which I thought at the time would be a one-off, a group of people said, would I do it again? And we did, for a number of charities. That was about 20 people. And the event has grown from then, and now we've had over 1,500 people do it. We've raised the best part of £500,000. We've had people come from 14 different countries in the world, from all walks of life, teachers, doctors, nurses, judges, rocket scientists, MPs, and it has become, in its way, possibly the most successful cycle ride in the country. And unique, probably in 2 respects. You can raise the money for whatever cause you want, and also, unlike any other major charity cycle ride I know, 100% of the money that is collected is given to charity. Nobody is paid for any of the considerable work that goes into organising this. And we have here today 2 other members of the committee, but there is in total a committee of about 12 people who spend a very large part of the year organising every aspect of the ride to make sure that this is a real success. And we really are looking forward to this year, our 16th ride, and I've no doubt the ride will go on and on and on, and soon we'll be celebrating the 20th year of the Paris to Hayling cycle ride.
The island's French connection is long-standing and quite varied. The Polycott family have been active for many years, forging links between Hayling and the people of Goron on the Normandy-Brittany borders through the Hayling-Goron Twinning Association. They arranged regular exchange visits, and last year's coach visit to Goron was spearheaded by Doug Sharp's veteran fire engine. The vehicle is in great demand for charity functions and proved very popular with our French friends.
The oldest major building on the island must be St Peter's in Northney. This delightful small church was built around 1140, and the interior is as rewarding to explore as the outside, with its eccentric pillar bases and the ancient font which has been used for baptisms since the early 12th century. The set of 3 bells are reputedly one of the oldest in the country and are still set in the original half wheels. Another point of interest is the fine Barlaston organ, which was originally built for the Wedgwood family of pottery fame. The ancient roof timbers provide a vivid contrast to those in the new church hall extension. When we first heard about this addition to the church, we were prepared to dislike it. But it really is a most elegant fusion of ancient and modern, and viewed from the west elevation fits in so well with the main church building. And the architects have been careful to join it to the old building with great sensitivity, without any permanent alteration to the original structure. Douglas Sharp took us on a tour of the island's older houses in another vehicle from his collection, this 4.5-litre Vauxhall Kington Tourer. There are still a number of very nice old thatched cottages dotted around the island, not least Uncle Dick's cottage in Northney. Some historians believe, however, that Oakdean on the Havant Road is possibly the oldest domestic dwelling in the country which is still occupied. Sadly, most of our grand old Victorian and Edwardian houses have been demolished in the march of development. However, a few remain, and we still have the Crescent and Royal Hotel buildings to remind us of the time before the coming of the railways, when it was hoped that Hayling would rival Brighton and Bognor as a tourist attraction. Imagine it, Hayling Regis. No doubt, the manor is the most significant house remaining on the island. It was built in 1777 on the site of a much older building, the original Grange of the Monks from the Abbey of Jumièges, so it probably has its origins way back in the 11th century. The manor's old walled garden holds another architectural treasure, a dovecot dating from the early 14th century. The doves nested in these apertures and were the monks' main source of protein throughout the winter months. Alex here is just over 5 feet tall, so those monks must have been quite small fellows, despite living on the fat of the land. This old estate agent's poster of 1905 has a fascinating map of Westtown at the turn of the century. But change was still slow, even when the Vauxhall was built in 1924. But as people became more mobile, changes did start to happen during the following decade. The Hayling Health Society first built holiday chalets at the Kench in the early 30s. Further development took place in the 1940s and 50s, with sales brochures extolling the virtues of this small island off the south coast, which is much favoured as a health resort. Alongside the chalets, there were originally dozens of houseboats around the Kench itself. These were eventually cleared away, leaving the handful that remain today. And the chalets themselves have changed somewhat from the modest cabins first visualised. By the way, at one time the golf club's 13th green was originally situated on this land. These listed Art Deco houses were also built in the early 1930s and were the forerunners of similar developments at Sandy Point from the 30s onwards. More holiday homes, such as the Seafront estate, were built at the same time. And it never ceases to amaze that so much land would be given over to open space in the centre of a development of quite modest houses. From the 60s onwards, the pace of development has accelerated, but there are still quite a lot of quiet places left to explore. Hampshire County Council has done much to preserve and sustain a number of important areas of natural beauty on the island. The county's countryside service has a team of 5 rangers operating from Staunton Country Park. Established here in 1988, the service maintains some 200 acres across Hayling, including the Kench and the popular Hayling Billy Trail and its boundaries. Ranger Peter Donnell is a dedicated naturalist and, as a Hayling resident, has acquired an unrivalled knowledge of the island's flora and fauna, which he recently put to paper in his book The Wildlife of Hayling Island. A favourite haunt is the salt marsh at Gutner Point, with its seasonal carpets of wild flowers. Anyway, let's hear what Peter has to say.
Most of these salt marshes of fairly ancient origin, formed maybe in the Middle Ages or possibly even earlier, and have survived virtually intact since that time. Unfortunately, they're under increasing pressure now with sea level rise, which is on the south coast here of England at the sort of highest rate anywhere in the country, about 6 millimetres a year. The increase in height of the salt marshes just can't keep pace with them. They really can only increase their height by 2 to 3 millimetres a year, and they're gradually being swamped, and we are going to lose them. Yeah, the sea pink, or thrift is its other name. It's an extremely common plant. Occurs on coastal cliffs down in Cornwall, sometimes on sand dunes, but here at Gutner Point makes a spectacular display on the salt marsh. It's usually at its best towards the second half of May, early June, and really is absolutely stunning. You can just get the sort of gentle scent coming off it in the extent when you get a big area like this. The County Council owned nature reserve here at Gutner Point incorporates one of the richest areas of salt marsh in the whole of southern England, possibly the richest actually, certainly as regards range of species that you find here. It also has the complete succession from open water out in Chichester harbour through the mud flats, up through the lower salt marsh, upper salt marsh, and eventually up to the sort of scrubby oak woodland at the top here. So it's one of the few places in southern England where you get this fantastic complete natural succession from one to the other. These spectacular mounds out in the grassland, these are the homes of the yellow meadow ant. These domes can be well over 100 years old and are a good indicator. The grassland obviously hasn't been ploughed for a long time. You can see here where the rabbits are grazing the turf short, and the mounds show up extremely well. Each mound contains the colony. The colony lives within the mound throughout the year, and it creates its own little sort of little ecosystem, if you like. The temperature remains fairly constant throughout the year, and obviously the dome is raised up from the surrounding grassland, so it avoids becoming waterlogged, and the colony is able to survive in there and very much insulated from sort of outside pressures. During the winter months, Gutner Point acts as a high tide roost for literally thousands of waders and wildfowl, and obviously these birds come here because it's an area which is relatively undisturbed, and they can wait for the tide to fall again when they can return out to the harbour to feed. Because of this, unfortunately, the access is restricted to Gutner Point. You can come here on sort of guided walks or with permission from the Countryside Service, but it's not open just purely to public access, because obviously people with dogs and things like that, dogs off the lead, could disturb the birds, and the birds are then using up lots of energy flying around on cold winter days, which they really need to maintain their body warmth, and it can actually be fatal. So we do actually restrict access, but that can be organised through sort of guided walks and things like that.
Did he say a sea rise of 6 millimetres per year? A quarter of an inch? Better not take out too long a mortgage. Based at Sparks Marina, Frank Dunster is a one-off, described as an old-fashioned gentleman in the best sense of the word by those who know him. He lives for his boat and for the harbour, and few know it better. Like his friend here, John Lee, Frank decided to mark the millennium by building a new boat. Among other things, Frank provides a delivery and emergency get-you-home service for the yachtsmen and fishermen who use the harbour. And he decided to invest in a new purpose-built rigid inflatable craft from Pepe Marine at Mill Rive.
Yes, sample the installation. We're not going to bother. It's a track at the edges for the use of the boat with nuts and bolts.
Many weeks of site visits throughout the winter culminated in the fitting of the sparkling new marine diesel engine, and one happy owner, all raring to go.
Hayling Rescue, this is Sparks Marina, over.
This is Hayling Rescue, over.
Hayling Rescue, Sparks Marina. We've just had a call to the harbour office for a vessel, a Sea Eagle, which has broken down at the harbour entrance requesting a tow, over.
Yes, that's one of the yard berth holders who've obviously broken down having gone out on a trip, so I'm going to have to nip out and tow them back into the marina.
Frank's work is quite varied, responding to the needs of harbour users, getting them back to port following engine failure, for example, in much the same way as you or I might contact the AA. It's quite amazing how many boats are put out of action by ropes fouling propellers. He's a dab hand with a kitchen knife to remedy that particular problem.
I do about 12 of these a year, including December and January.
This little rise we're coming up to on the right hand side is called Dip Rise, and it goes right into Tornabury Fort and used to feed the moat surrounding the fort. And if you look right at the very entrance, you can see the spire of St Mary's Church, and it's my contention that the stones for that church coming over from France were taken up that little rise and landed on Thornbury Fort, and then later transported across the fields to the St Mary's Church site way back in the 13th century.
Approaching the picturesque entrance porch to the parish church of St Mary's, you'll pass the great yew tree, possibly the oldest in Hampshire. The vicar, Paul Ginniver, tells us that the tree has been examined under the yew tree campaign, and a certificate signed by botanist David Bellamy states that this splendid tree is over 2,000 years old. Just think about it. That's the time of Christ's birth. Quite astonishing. So it predates the church, which was built around 1250 by the monks of Dinenage, by a considerable time, and incidentally was chosen to provide cuttings for many new trees planted to mark the millennium. Inside there's plenty of interesting architectural detail, especially the double piscina, ancient fonts and many pieces of carving which are worth hunting for. Apparently, the church needed considerable underpinning after the 1889 earthquake. Earthquakes? Rising sea levels? Shouldn't someone have told us this before we moved here? Peter Donnell has suggested we only need a plague of locusts for a biblical full house. When Hayling's at its sunniest, there are few places nicer to spend an old-time family day out than on the beach. It's safe for bathing, away from the two harbour entrances. The water quality's up to the highest EU standards, and few beaches anywhere can offer such easy access, nor the amount of parking space and common land so close to the waterside. Well, this is all very nice on a hot summer day. It's all great fun for everyone, with loads of activity everywhere. Lots of splashing about and not a care in the world. But I wonder what's going on down there under the waves. These people clearly think there's something there. These are collecting oysters. These are catching squid. And John Lee's certain there is something there because he built a new boat a year or so ago. It won't win any prizes for elegance, but it's clearly a stable platform for hauling up the crab and lobster pots. We decided to go along to the Portsmouth Aquarium to find out more. We expected bass and mackerel, but not some of the other inhabitants. Matt Clark kindly offered to tell us more about life under the Solent.
Now, the gurnard is one of the more unusual fish to be found around Britain. It actually walks on small finger-like protrusions, which it uses to search for food in amongst rocks and sands. Now this tank contains a selection of the creatures that you'll find in the solents. This ray here is a thornback ray, Britain's most common species of ray. There are around 30 different species of ray that can be found around the coast of Britain. Most people don't know that rays are actually very close relatives of the shark. They may look quite different, but they are extremely closely related. And this tank is home to some of the species of shark that can be found around Britain. There are 28 different species. The smallest that can be found around Hayling Island is the lesser spotted dogfish, that are roughly about 40 centimetres in length, right up to the basking shark, which can get up to 12 metres. If you like to think of that in terms of old measurements, that's nearly 40 feet. For anyone that's at all worried about bathing around Hayling Island, none of the sharks found around Britain are dangerous to human beings.
Well, that's all very reassuring, but what about 6-foot congers under the pier? Or how about Hercules weighing in at 9 pounds? That's the weight of an average domestic cat. He's a star of network television and snaps 1-inch plastic pipes as his party trick. John Lee would certainly like to meet him. Anyway, in complete contrast, these humble sticklebacks from the Portsmouth moat are equally at home in fresh all salt water. I didn't know that. Bishop Stationers of Elm Grove kindly supplied this selection of old postcards from their art print house selection. These old prints show scenes from a more leisurely age, and you'll no doubt recognise some of the locations. The new beach buggy, the latest addition to Havant Council's ongoing commitment to maintaining one of the best stretches of beach and common along the south coast. The patrol makes regular sweeps to keep a watchful eye on the many miles of beach along Hayling Bay and advise owners on dog-free zones. Another initiative is the council's excellent boardwalk scheme, laid out along the top of the beach to provide access for disabled people who might otherwise be unable to get close enough to enjoy the view. This successful project has proved to be a much admired innovation and is now being copied by other authorities. This is typical of the constant efforts put in by the council and its operatives, like Arthur Tickner here, to maintain the beaches to blue flag standards. Arthur's one of a team of 8 full-time and 25 seasonal workers who are employed to service the Beachlands Centre and 4.5 miles of Hayling beaches. In the season, Arthur sets out before 6 each day to cycle the 10 miles to work from his home in Waterlooville. Throughout the summer months, he needs an early start to complete the work of clearing the mountains of discarded rubbish left by beach users. And he gets very upset by some of the things he finds on his rounds.
Shouldn't be allowed on the beach, glass bottle.
David Archer's team have a right to be proud of their achievement in winning and keeping 2 blue flags out of just 55 awarded nationwide, plus the Seaside Award. And we should also mention the blue flag held by Northney Marina. David tells us that over a good summer weekend, they sometimes clear away 2 tons of rubbish. That's 2 lorry loads daily from the area. Now that is quite literally an awful lot of rubbish, isn't it? Bev Gray is a member of the full-time team and our very own weather girl. A trained meteorological observer, she takes daily readings at the weather station of temperature, sunshine and rainfall. This information is then passed on and used by the Met Office in preparing their nationwide reports. Bev also helps patrol and monitor the beach and tries to keep an eye on the security of the beach huts, which are such a feature of the beachscape. The beach huts are gathered into small groups, each with their own regular communities. One particular family who possibly deserves some sort of long service medal is that of Barbara West, who's been coming to Hayling now for over 50 years.
I first came to Hayling Island in 1947 for a holiday and continued to come every year for a fortnight and day trips until the late 50s, when there was a short break, and then in 1961 we came as a family with my own children right up till the present day. I love coming to Hayling, particularly for the swimming. The water is so clean and I like to go in 2 or 3 times a day if I can.
Barbara loves the water and I can't keep her out of it. She goes for about 3 swims a day for half an hour. I don't like the water, so I just stay up and look after the beach hut.
The changes have been many. Particularly, you could walk all over the island, but with the advent of all the houses being built, that's not possible now. But we used to walk along the sandy beaches to where the boats came in with the fish, and we could even buy fish from the boats on the beach. When we have grandchildren here and it's one big family party, we have as many as 20 or even 30 people here and all have a lovely time on the beach in a big party.
While we're in the beachland area, Hayling Island played a small but significant part in World War II when the Royal Hotel was taken over by the military for the duration. When Wilbert heard we were doing a piece on the war, he was very keen to play the part of Winston Churchill. However, he kept eating the cigars, so we just used him in the introduction. Well, that's show business. Among other roles, the island served as a decoy for air raids on Portsmouth and was strategically placed to play a significant role in the preparations for D-Day. Captain Derek Oakley of the Royal Marines has some interesting stories to tell of the time when the island was very much Fortress Hayling.
The most significant military presence on the island during the war was that of the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines. With its ideal beaches and proximity to Portsmouth, staff at Naval Headquarters had soon recognised Hayling's value as a training and repair base for landing craft. And as numbers of service personnel rose, they also saw that the 4 large pre-war holiday camps on the island would provide excellent ready-made accommodation for the troops. Hayling, with its 4,000 inhabitants, became a restricted area, and then the women in uniform started to arrive. The ATS took over many of the duties at the ACAC sites, and a large number of Wrens were drafted in to work at the landing craft headquarters at the Royal Hotel.
Most of the Wrens were billeted in private houses, and some Royal Marines took over the Fintrack Hotel on the seafront. Indeed, with so many servicemen and women around the island, it became a very sociable place to be.
One major development was the establishment of a highly secret naval organisation in these buildings at Hayling Island Sailing Club. Known as COPS, or Combined Operations Pilotage Parties, This was the forerunner of today's Royal Marines Special Boat Service. Sandy Point was an ideal site for training small parties of soldiers and sailors as frogmen and canoeists for beach reconnaissance and clandestine operations throughout the European war zone. Some became crews of midget submarines, and Major Blondie Hasler, one of the surviving cockleshell heroes, was a senior instructor.
Still seen today around the island are some of the 18 pillboxes which were built as defences for the island. 5 were constructed on the golf course area, 5 more were along the beaches towards Hayling Sailing Club, 3 more up the eastern side, and a further 5 which are very prominent today could be seen in West Lane, Door Lane and on Havant Road near the Maypole Inn. When German air raids started bombing Portsmouth Dockyard in 1940, the authorities realised that from the air, Hayling Island was a very similar shape to Portsea Island. As we know, Portsmouth Dockyard is situated in the southwest corner, and that was probably the quietest corner, in fact, of Hayling Island. And so a decoy system was set up. This was run by Royal Air Force personnel along with Royal Engineers, who, when they heard that the air raid was imminent, they would set flares alight and light oil drums down in the southwest corner, much to the consternation, I might say, of the very few inhabitants who lived there, and particularly 219 anti-aircraft battery who were sighted on Sina Common.
There were 3 anti-aircraft gun sites and 1 searchlight battery on Hayling. The gun emplacements on Sina Common still survive today as a picnic area close to Sina Lake. Unfortunately, on the night of April the 17th, 1941, more than 30 bombs were dropped on the site, knocking out 3 of the guns and killing 6 gunners, who are commemorated by a plaque on the recently renovated site.
Here, just south of the ferryboat inn, 4 sections of Mulberry Harbour were built. These sections were just part of 164 sections which were built along the south coast of England and in the Thames estuary in order to form the artificial harbour that was placed off Arromanches in order to ferry in supplies for the D-Day landings. A local builder was contracted who employed 600 people who were bussed onto the island daily. Each of the sections was 200 feet long, 60 feet high and weighed over 6,000 tons. One piece, which didn't quite make it across to France, can still be seen today in Langstone Harbour. As one sailor put it, who was ferried across the channel, "I didn't join the Royal Navy to go to sea on a lump of concrete with no guns."
No day at the seaside is complete without a ride on the roundabouts, and around the Big Tent at Beachlands we can certainly have all the fun of the fair. Things change and some of the old favourites have gone forever. There's no big wheel anymore, but there are plenty of new attractions to keep all the family amused, and the kids love it. Throughout the sailing season, Frank works closely with the sailing clubs in the harbour, providing extra backup as a support and rescue boat during club and championship events. These events can be significant in developing the skills of our young sailors. The successful medalists at the 2000 Olympics all trained and raced in the waters around Hayling. One job is to tow small craft to and from the beach when the tides and wind are unfavourable. Another essential task is helping sailors right their dinghies after a spill. Frank can sometimes be too helpful for his own good and will refuse no one. Even after a hard day's work, he was happy to help out these jet ski owners who'd broken down in the harbour. Towed them all the way back to Chichester and got a thank you for his trouble. When you work for so long in the harbour, you get to know all its regulars, both man and beast. And one day, Frank had a nice surprise for us all.
Today we're off to see the seals in Chichester harbour, in their secret hideaway near Hayling Island. I've been studying the seals now for 13 years, so I have a good idea where they might well be. It's generally believed that there are no resident seals to be found all along the south coast from Dover to Falmouth. However, we do have our own small group of common seals here in the harbour. 3 were first sighted in the late 80s, and despite a couple of fatalities, the group has gradually grown up to a colony of about 7 seals, including at least 1 pregnant female. They're always very aware of our presence. Very wary, in fact, sometimes. Today they seem pretty relaxed. In fact, they're thoroughly enjoying the sunshine. They do enjoy the sunshine this time, just now, but there should be about 8 of them. The baby one actually went back into the water before we got close enough to see it. We've seen them right up Chichester, right up at the Chichester Reach. We regard their home as that particular rise because they always return there on the flood tide. And you can see them in that vicinity most of the time. On a daily basis, so that really is their home. While they do go over the rest of the harbour, they always return to that one spot.
The whole of Hayling Beach and Common contains important communities of plants, birds and insects, and over 150 plant species have been identified, particularly at the east and western ends. Some are native, others have been introduced. These are a few of the more obvious ones. Sea kale, with its white flowers and sculptural seed pods. Viper bugloss, an unattractive name for this pretty flower. Tree lupin, sea holly, and rose campion, and the delightful green-winged orchid. The area is very popular with botanists, and in the spring small groups can occasionally be observed in the dunes at Gunner Point. They're quite rare, so try not to disturb them. This area has been designated as one of several sites of special scientific interest on the island, and as such should be treated with great care by the visiting public. Hayling's size, at about 5 miles long and an island to boot, makes it the ideal place to record and write about.
Hi, how are you? Very well.
Many talented people have made their contributions, not least Vic Pearce-Jones, historian, journalist and chairman of the Bosmere 100 Heritage Society. It's unlikely that anywhere else in the country has been so well chronicled by its inhabitants. Vic has some fascinating and quite persuasive views about the early history of the island. It's one of those magical summer days, absolutely still and crystal clear. My Lord's Pond from Wilson's Boatyard hasn't a ripple on it. And on the far bank, the ancient oaks of Tournabury Wood. The site, on private property, encloses Hayling's oldest settlement, an Iron Age fortress that has fascinated historians for centuries. Although now filled in and overgrown, you can still make out the lines of the moat and ramparts. These must have been 15 to 20 feet high, and it seems likely that close by, Dip Rythe once offered berthing for boats before the early monks built the first sea wall with discarded stone and reclaimed much of this land.
This was the principal fortress of the kings of the Atrebates, who ruled land in the south of England and in France and became very wealthy because of cross-channel trade. They also had a no-go treaty with the Romans, which meant that it became a haven for people fleeing from persecution in the Mediterranean. Therefore, it could have been a place where Joseph of Arimathea, according to the story, brought the young Jesus Christ from the Holy Land to escape persecution there. After the crucifixion, Joseph of Arimathea may have returned here with the Holy Grail, Jesus' cup at the Last Supper, and may have taken it on to Glastonbury, as the myth says, but I prefer to believe that it is still here somewhere on Hayling Island. In 43 AD, the Romans came to Britain permanently. They landed in this district and were so impressed by the holiness of the area that they actually built a beautiful 7-story temple across the fields there in North Hayling. This was about the year 70 AD. It coincided with the year in which the Romans under Vespasian and Titus destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem, and some people believe that the purpose of this new temple was to house some of the sacred scrolls and objects which were rescued from the Jerusalem temple, which was destroyed by fire. Beyond the trees here we have My Lord's Pond. The name has mystified people because there never really was a resident lord of the manor on Hayling. There could have been another name, a Celtic name, Merlin, the sea lake. And that may have been the source and origin of the name Merlin the Wizard. Don't forget, his name really wasn't Merlin, he was the Wizard of Merlin, the Wizard of the Sea Lake. And he may have raised King Arthur, according to the tradition, beside the sea here on Hayling. This could also help us unravel the mystery of the name Excalibur, the sword Excalibur. In Roman times, the fortress at Havant was known as Caer Limber. If something had come from Caer Kaya limber, a sword for example, it would have been called ex-Kaya limber. So it is quite possible that Merlin and his protege, King Arthur, did find a sword in the ruins of Havant, and that became the source of the legend about ex-Kaya limber, or Excalibur, the sword Excalibur. So how did this story about Joseph of Arimathea, the Holy Grail, Merlin, Excalibur, King Arthur, how did this become the Glastonbury myth? The answer is that in the Dark Ages there was a tradition that a powerful monastery like Glastonbury, or a church, a cathedral, could actually pinch or acquire somebody else's traditions. There was an open market in holy relics, the bones of the saints, and so on and so forth. The people at Glastonbury, the monks, were not wealthy. They were looking for ways of promoting their own history, their own heritage. They heard about this story about Hayling. At the time, Hayling was actually owned by the French Abbey of Jumiers with the French prior. The island was disunited in many ways, whereas the Glastonbury monks were very powerful and very ruthless. They acquired the Hayling tradition. So what should have been today known as the Hayling tradition is now known as the Glastonbury myth.
Well, what do you make of that then? By the way, the 9th century Anglo-Saxon for our island is apparently Hayling Gay, or the island of the Holy Grail. But Merlin? Excalibur? No, it's not possible, is it? Or is it? And finally, when we were boys, it was always a great adventure to walk the length of the Winner Bank at low tide. But am I imagining it? I may be wrong. Isn't it twice as long now as it used to be?